I'd love to get started. I know there's a lot of cake buying out there. So thank you very much for coming. We're going to kick the show right off before some opening remarks. We're going to have a wonderful group start for you, Bostonality. writer by passion. I'm a 4th grade teacher by trade. And so I spend a lot of time reading children's books. One of my favorite authors to share with my students is Kate DiCamillo. In her latest book, she writes, "All words, at all times, true or false, whispered or shouted, are clues to the workings of the human heart. Listen. You must, if you care to understand anything at all. You must become a giant ear." I know that you're all here today and ready with your figurative giant ears. And they should be prepared to be astonished, moved, mesmerized by the stories that our brave cast will share. When we listen, we begin to perhaps understand something that we didn't before. So often the stigma that surrounds mental illness makes speaking about it taboo. And that's why today's show is so mightily important. Each time a story is shared, each time an utterance of truth is spoken, it's a chance to engage, to connect, and to hopefully inspire somebody to say, "Me too." Kate also wrote that stories are light, and light is precious in a world that's often dark. Begin at the beginning. So let's do that. Let's begin. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me immense pleasure to hand the podium over to our first storyteller, the incomparably eloquent Amy Ferris. Amy Ferris.
I just have to say that it is extraordinary to be here. Thank you. Courage. That's a huge, small word. When I decided to take on this topic, mental illness, I thought I knew what courage was, what it looked like. I was wrong. I say that without any hesitation. I have often thought of suicide as a way out of my pain, my heartbreak, my sorrow, my mood swings, my fears, and crippling self-doubt. For me, truthfully, it was a second thought, an impulse. The first being, how do I get out of here? I understand why folks take their life. I do. I understand that moment, that fierce, mighty, blinding moment. But I also understand why we're told to count to 20. Breathe in and breathe out. Put the gun down. Place the pills back in the bottle. Remove the scarf and sit. Breathe. Make a call. Ask for help. Reach out. Reach out again and again and again and again. Life is precious. It is precious even in the worst of times. Because even in the worst of times, there is always something that can reel us back home. It takes massive courage to say, "I'm not happy." To say and declare out loud, "Please help me, help me." It takes massive courage to ask someone to hold you. It takes huge courage to share our lives, the messy, dirty, crappy, and complicated pieces of our lives. It also takes enormous courage to keep that pain a secret. After all, we live in a world where the round, yellow, happy face was the single biggest seller for years and years. People love happy. A frown would have never sold. It takes massive courage to wear a frown. It takes guts to wear it and own it and say, "Here's my story. Maybe this can help you." Right after Robin Williams died and committed suicide, my friend asked me, "Did you ever try it?" Yes, I said yes. I tried suicide. I was young and sad, and I was miserable and so unhappy, and I felt all alone in the world. I felt like nobody knew what it was like, this damp darkness. Everything was pitch black. There was no color anywhere. It was dark and lonely, and the best way that I can describe how I felt at a time in my life was like being in the middle of a forest. and it's eerily dark, and you don't know which way to turn. So you start taking baby steps, teeny steps, because you don't know where you are and you can't see anything and you don't know how to find your way out of the darkness. And then you reach out for something, but it's not there, and you fall down and you don't know how to get up. So you start by getting up off your knees. And then slowly, very slowly, you straighten up and start to walk through the darkness. And you're not sure you're going to make it out, but you silently hope and wish and pray that you do. And I said to her, my friend, you know that saying, there's a tunnel, there's a light at the end of a tunnel? Well, the truth is there is no tunnel. You cannot see the tunnel. So yes, I tried suicide. The pills, the stomach pumped, and all that follows, and I was lucky. I was really lucky, fortunate and blessed, and whatever you want to call it, because at 19, somebody wanted to save me and help me and hold me. And I became a Buddhist, and then I battled my demons and unhappiness and self-hatred every single day. Well, not every day. Some days they got the best of me, and I could barely move, but I fought hard and mighty. And some days I won, and some days they won, and some days it was a match. And some days I wanted to die, and some days I wanted to not only live, but to live with passion and find beauty in my life and find love. And then what I found out that you gotta save your own life. Because the person holding your hand, they can get really tired. They hold on so long and so tight that their arm aches. And that's when I had my breakfast at Epiphany moment. If you really want to save yourself, you gotta be willing to throw someone else a line. You gotta grab onto someone and save them and help them and hold them. You gotta be willing to see another person suffering in pain and look them in the eye and say, I know how you feel. I have your back. I'm gonna hold you and I'm gonna hold you tight, and the truth is, the balls out truth is this. Those of us who suffer from bouts of depression, who don't believe we're good enough, who can barely make it out of bed some days, who struggle with self-esteem and the whole concept of self-love. When we use our pain and our suffering so that we can understand someone else's heart, it all changes. It doesn't eliminate our pain, and it doesn't make it vanish, but it does make it bigger than just ourselves. It makes it somewhat worth the struggle in that moment. And I look at folks that I know, some really personally and some on the periphery, who have gone through hell and back 1,000,000 times. And now they're using their lives to inspire and encourage and awaken the good and greatness in others, because they know what it was like to be flat out broken into little tiny pieces. So yes, I tried it. And I'm awfully glad that I did not succeed at it. I'm wholly glad that it was a failure and that I call it my greatest failure. Because I get to rise up every single day and work through my life stuff and face my demons and strut my stuff. And then I get to tell each of you right now that you're awesome. You're magic and glitter and all that is extraordinary in the world. Because the truth is, we are. Even in our darkest moments, even in our saddest moments, even in our most broken moments, we have magic in us. We have glitter and sparkles. We are all goddesses and gods, bodhisattvas and Buddhas, kings and queens, and we are amazing beyond belief, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise, ever. So go on today, right now, and strut your gorgeous stuff, knowing that you are not alone. This I know for sure. This I would bet my life on. Thank you.
Trichotillomania, or for those of us who struggle with it, just trick. Trick is one of many disorders that falls under the category of compulsive, body-focused, repetitive behaviors, including skin picking and nail biting. Trichotillomania itself is a disorder that leads to hair loss from repetitive self-pulling of hair. While the underlying biology is not clearly understood, research shows that people with trichotillomania generally have a neurologically based predisposition to pull their hair. We often also struggle with anxiety and depression. Pulling does not hurt, nor are we trying to damage ourselves. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It is a coping mechanism that I and many others have developed to help self-soothe and self-comfort in the face of anxiety and many other difficult emotions. To us, it feels good. I had no idea of trick's existence before it came creeping into my life 12 years ago when I was 17 years old. Actually, it's amazing how few people know about trichotillomania, despite the fact that an estimated 2 to 4% of the population suffers from it. Trick was my first encounter with a force, an urge so powerful that I wasn't able to overcome it, despite the fact that I could see the damage I was causing to myself physically, and despite the shame and emotional turmoil it caused and still causes inside of me. People who don't understand say, just stop, you're doing this to yourself. I say, I wish it was that easy. I discovered trick, or rather it discovered me, when I moved home to begin the life of a normal teenager. I had just experienced an abrupt end to a lifelong pursuit as a career as an elite figure skater. At age 16, I had moved 1,000 miles away from my loving family and my lifelong support network to train with a new coach. Lonely and in pain from a previous injury, I was thrown into a mental and physical limbo for nearly a year. When an MRI finally revealed a fracture that would forever prevent me from training at an elite level again, I quit skating, and my life turned upside down. It came stealthily at first, an eyelash here, an eyebrow there, and a feeling of relief and comfort with no real visible damage done. But within a year, trick was tearing through my life, ripping at every string of my self-confidence. When deciding what event or incident I might describe to you today that best conveys my struggle with trick over the past 12 years, I reflected on all of the shame, embarrassment, and sadness it has caused me. I remember the first time ever that I wasn't able to wear my hair down because of a thin spot on the crown of my head. There was the time I cried in the bathroom while getting ready for my prom because I couldn't figure out how to hide the bald spot on the side of my head with any hairdo except for a plain ponytail. There was the time I buzzed off all of my long blonde locks my first year in college, believing it would help me stop pulling. There was the day my new boyfriend asked why I wouldn't take off my hats around him, and I confessed the truth about my trick to him through tears of fear, which, by the way, he took beautifully and gracefully, and he's been my rock of support ever since. There was the day I got fitted for a wig so that I could go to job interviews without facing judgment. I waited in the back room of a local salon, surrounded by brochures and books for women with cancer. There was the first time I wore my wig in public, absolutely terrified that somebody would be able to tell it wasn't my real hair. After 2 years with the wig, there was the day when I decided that my hair had grown out enough that my coworkers might not notice the change, so I was able to stop wearing it. Now that I no longer wear the wig, there are innumerable occasions, weddings, holidays, swimming at the beach, windy days, when I long to do my hair in pretty ways. A braid, a loose updo, down around my shoulders, loose and free. But I can't. I still have thin patches and all different lengths of hair that stick out if not slicked back. The most important thing though, and the thing that I really want to tell you about my struggle with trick, is that I am improving with a lot of diligence, hard work, and support. There are good days, and there are certainly still bad days. There are days when I don't have a desire to touch my hair even once. There are days when it takes all the strength that I can muster up inside of me to bring my hand down and away from my head after pulling out clumps at a time. But I'm learning a lot about my disorder and how to manage and control it, and my hair is growing back, slowly. I have come to understand that my trick will always be an internal struggle that requires constant diligence and support in order for me to manage it effectively. There's no medication, treatment, or magic bullet that will make it disappear. It's a part of me that will probably always exist, yet it is just that, one part of me. In the past few months, I've been lucky enough to work with a psychologist and researcher who specializes in trick. I found an amazing support group of others who struggle in their addiction to hair pulling just like me. And that boyfriend I talked about, the one who took the news of my trick so gracefully, well, he's still my rock and the love of my life. And we're getting married next year. What I'm striving toward, what I want more than anything, is for my trick not to define my appearance on our wedding day. I'm going to have a head full of long, thick, gorgeous hair, and it's going to be done into a beautiful, loose, and elegant updo without a second thought to any embarrassing thin spots, the way I've always dreamed it would be. Thank you.
Jeff and I were 24 years old when we met at an open mic night. He was playing harmonica. I thought he was cute, so in a leap of faith, I gave him my number.
The next week, I won tickets to a music festival, and I invited Heather to join me. We really hit it off, connecting through our active outdoor lifestyles.
From the time of our first date, I was open and honest with Jeff about my experiences with bipolar disorder. I had been diagnosed almost 2 years prior, and now, a month shy of my college graduation, I was stabilized through proper treatment and medications to manage my disease. Jeff and I had an exciting first 2 years together, hiking, camping, skiing, and meeting new friends. We enjoyed one another and the life we were creating together. A long period of remission led my doctor to recommend that I discontinue my medication. Jeff and I relocated to the Adirondack Mountains soon thereafter, and I did not seek a new treatment provider. About a year later, I experienced a severe psychotic episode. While I only recall bits and pieces of my psychotic state, I know that my energy level was extreme and my thoughts were grandiose. I recall feeling as though I could not sit still, I could not be still. Jeff received a call from my employer regarding my erratic behaviors.
In hindsight, there were signs of manic behavior leading up to that first night I brought Heather to the emergency room for help. Although Heather told me some of the behaviors that she exhibited during her previous manic states, it did not prepare me for the feelings of helplessness I experienced when I witnessed it firsthand. I wanted to advocate for this person I cared for, but had no idea what I was supposed to do. The busy ER staff gave me little guidance, telling me only to keep her contained in a small intake room until someone was able to see us. I did my best to follow their instructions. However, trying to keep her confined in that small space for over an hour, she became more agitated. She saw me as the reason she couldn't leave. She began to assault me in a violent rage. Only then did we attract the immediate assistance of hospital personnel who rushed in to restrain her and administer a strong sedative. She was quickly taken away to an inpatient room, and I was told nothing. Despite our long-term relationship, I could not accompany her to the inpatient room or even learn more about what was happening. I did not hear from Heather again until her condition improved enough for her to gain phone privileges from the inpatient unit. This traumatic experience taught me to recognize subtle changes in Heather's behavior and prompted us to work together to make a plan of action in case of future episodes. Heather signed a release for me to speak to medical personnel, allowing for a free communication so that I could play a more active role in her treatment and recovery.
I resumed treatment, and a year later, Jeff proposed to me on top of Skylight Mountain. After our marriage, we were excited to start a family of our own. We were proactive and honest about my bipolar diagnosis with my prenatal care providers, and it was decided that I would not take my psychotropic medications during pregnancy. I was well until the delivery of our beautiful and healthy daughter, but by the time that my hospital discharge date approached, it was clear to both of us that I was distraught and struggling. Despite my mental health history, my postpartum discharge plan did not include a scheduled appointment with my psychiatrist or any other mental health provider. Soon after returning home with our new baby, I was once again in a psychotic state.
I quickly realized Heather's situation was out of control. On the way to the hospital, I explained to Heather what we were doing, and she tearfully agreed, but then would just as quickly forget and thought we were on a vacation trip, so I would have to explain it all over again. I felt more confident this time around, as I was armed with two important tools: a medical release to speak with all of Heather's providers, and the knowledge that sometimes to be a good advocate, you have to be a persistent pain in the ass. When we got to the hospital, we were once again asked to wait in a small admitting room. This time I made no attempt to keep her in that room and instead allowed her to wander the ER in her psychotic state, following her to ensure her safety. The medical staff asked me more than once if I believed Heather would harm our new baby, and I repeatedly told them that Heather was often not even aware that she had just delivered a baby. When they told me they did not believe that Heather met the standard for admission and that I should take her home, I refused, and soon she was evaluated by another ER doctor and was immediately admitted, just as her psychiatrist had recommended. I felt good that I was able to advocate for my wife when she was unable to advocate for herself. After 3 weeks in a psychiatric unit and many months getting Heather the help that she needed, we were able to get our lives back on track. I know that Heather's behaviors, while in a psychotic state, are not Heather. They are only symptoms of an illness that requires treatment and understanding.
I believe our marriage is successful despite the challenges of my disease for the same reason that any relationship is successful. Jeff and I continue to learn to take care of ourselves and to take care of each other. We know my symptoms. We know that I need to stay in treatment. We know that we have the right to tell providers what is or what is not working for us. It is not always easy or comfortable, but we have learned to do the work, to be aware, and to find our best support system. My past includes times that I have been very sick, but I'm living proof that people diagnosed with significant psychiatric disorders can be well, and in fact, they can thrive. Jeff and I have climbed many mountains together, both literally and figuratively. We know for sure that the journey is always worth it. Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, Tyler Van Young.
Hi. I have developed a really bad habit. I keep saying I'll tell the story of me and my dad, and then I don't. The first time I thought I was ready to tell it was for Amy Ferris's new book. It's called Shades of Blue, and it's going to be amazing. You can order it on Amazon. Anyway, Amy asked me to contribute a piece, and I really wanted to, but I was too scared. I felt like all the other writers were going to be more talented, and I chickened out. And then I read about this show, and I wanted to sell some cakes. Amy, Quinn, and Logan Fisher, the producers of the show, they were delighted. So I started planning. But then I realized you guys might be confused to see me selling great cakes in the theater lobby. And then maybe I should get up here and explain the whole great cake thing. So once again, I offered to tell my story. And you know what? The same thing happened. I sat at my computer and I wrote draft after draft, doing my best to access my English literature degree and feeling like a miserable failure. I think a big part of the problem is that the story of me and my dad is really long. It's 51 years and 353 days long to be exact, and there's just not time for that today. So after a whole lot of fretting, I'm just going to tell you the simple story of how the Depressed Cake Shop was born, which will explain the great cakes, which will hopefully encourage you to come visit us after the show and say hi before I have to get on a plane to Los Angeles, and try some cake and maybe even buy one of the cute shirts we're selling. It may be hard to imagine, but I used to be a pretty fancy Hollywood executive. I had a cool job and a big office and a cute boyfriend who lived in London. I traveled all over the world and I met movie stars and I went to the Academy Awards. Someone who worked for me is actually here today. Her name's Tracy. If you ask her, she'll tell you, I used to be kind of fancy. But then my mom got sick and she died, which was awful. So much more awful than I ever could have imagined. And then 18 months later, my dad had a psychotic break. I must admit that before 2008, I'd never heard the term psychotic break or the term voluntary hold. I certainly didn't know that ECT was the politically correct term for electroshock therapy. And most crucially, I had no idea that this scary thing I'd only seen in movies was a preferred treatment for patients with severe bipolar disease. But you better believe I learned those things really fast, because I just lost my mother, and there was no way I was going to lose my father. The company where I worked had been somewhat patient when my mom was sick, but they were none too pleased to hear that I had another parent in crisis. My mom's illness had been a relatively straightforward, albeit hideous affair. Diagnosis, treatment, false hope, death, a journey too many families of cancer patients know all too well. But this time we were in uncharted waters. Mental illness is not as straightforward as cancer. I found myself apologizing to my boss, joking about how lucky it was that I only had one parent left. The joke covered an ugly truth. My dad was severely ill, and I had no idea what was going to happen from one day to the next. I had a feeling that my boss was going to have to get used to me being distracted at best and absent at worst. This is the part, which I keep telling her, where I wish my sister was here, because she's funny, and this is a funny story. So she came home because I was in England, and my dad was sick. He was telling her he was going to die, he was never going to eat again. It was awful, and she was wasting her time, and she should just leave so he could get about the business of dying. And she decided that the best thing to do was make my mother's chicken salad, because that was going to make everything better. So she got out the chicken and the celery and the mayonnaise, and she made him this chicken salad sandwich. And the entire time he was saying, "You are wasting your time, there's no way I'm eating that chicken salad, just go home and just leave me alone." But she was undaunted. So she made the chicken salad and she put it down on the table, and he took one bite and he looked up and said, "Honey, do you have any pickles?" That's totally a joke story. We now refer to that as the last good moment. The two of us moved into his house, armed with a bottle of Cymbalta, a psychiatrist had prescribed him, and we waited for things to return to normal. That never happened. Our dad refused to eat, he wouldn't shower, he wouldn't come out of his room, he sobbed that he wanted to die. His doctor never returned our increasingly frantic phone calls. We were all alone and we were terrified. One sleepless night on the computer, Googling desperately to find any solution, I read that UCLA had a treatment center for geriatric psych. I naively called to make an appointment. I discovered that our dad could not be hospitalized unless he was obviously suicidal or homicidal. Abject despair and a complete break from reality are apparently not severe enough symptoms to warrant hospitalization in my home state of California. After 1,000 calls, we finally found a doctor with admitting privileges, and we finally obtained a bed at UCLA. This was the beginning of a 7-year journey that ended in 2014 when our dad passed away at our home, surrounded by his daughters, my sweet beagle at his side. I will spare you the details, but I will say now that I truly believe my dad was a superhero. Over the course of those 7 years, I learned he had suffered with this disease his entire life, and that he had battled mightily to have joy, a family, children, a successful career. My dad was bipolar, but he was a Harvard MBA, an avid photographer, a loving husband, a champion bridge player, a great storyteller, and an obsessed Seinfeld fan. Because of the stigma that surrounds mental illness, he and my mother were closeted for their entire marriage. I dream of a world where mental health is discussed openly, where daughters like me know exactly who to call when they need help for their loved ones. So this brings me back to the cake shop. It's really simple. We sell great cakes to symbolize that depression is like a gray cloud over an otherwise beautiful world. We give the money we raise to local charities. Today's proceeds will go to This Is My Brave to help them continue to produce shows like this one. There's a quote I love from Mother Teresa. "Not all of us can do great things, but we can do small things with great love." I want to do my part to help people who are suffering one gray cake at a time. My dad was brilliant and talented and funny and accomplished. His depression was only a part of who he was. He also loved to inspire people by giving them framed quotes. So I'm going to leave you with one I found, written by Dean Koontz. "Where there's cake, there is hope, and there's always cake." Thank you for being here. Ladies and gentlemen, Kathy McNeil.
An extended stay. Finally, one gets used to living without real mirrors, signing out razor blades, and the black death boredom of self-discovery via grown-up coloring groups. Tolerated, by a single relentless obsession. The freedom to be whole lies in the mundane, the protocol of institutional rules, and above all, cooperative smiles that block medicated urges, and truths. The quiet room. Running with wolves is a dangerous game, and loneliness gets swallowed with wine and colorful pills. All pretense of sanity gone, driven out by a masterful love. The lords of chaos were chasing me down, and I've shed the last of my fears, taking comfort in soft, cushioned walls. Oh, what a dark place is hate. And I never said I would run from the guns or notorious thieves. I once read all the works of Desaad, and that left a big part of me dead. But that was another time and another place. Still, I wanted to dance barefoot all night to leave a shadow on the face of the moon. So I danced till my feet finally bled. I danced till I finally cried. And now I can finally rest. All the wolves are finally gone, and I'm singing inside. Housework. I'm not defending cleaning sinks and making toilets shine. That's just my way of running from old alleys that are blind and complicated places that I'd rather leave behind. With their sick and sorry faces, each centered in their time of need and bleeding from me, mine. Oh, there goes my mascara, making muddy little lines again. Don't worry, I'll be fine, and friends will be coming to my house. Just wait till everything's in order. Right now I'm busy dusting old books, so please don't bother. Breakthroughs. She sits alone every day, breadcrumbs on her lower lip, and a couple of spots of mayonnaise on her cheeks. Neither is she very careful about closing her mouth completely when she chews, but her sausage fingers hold the sandwich cut on the diagonal by the crust with pinky sticking out, so the effort is there, along with medication timers. She loves the park, a place to people watch, and no one will notice that being there is now her own preference, since they put the fires out. Telling her it was like a fever breaking after the ice baths, so very cold and so long ago. Transitions. When I couldn't accept the dazzling light shining on all my faults, you said you would turn off the sun for me, if only the rest of the world didn't mind so much that you were playing favorites. It's true that no one has the right to bring darkness on the unsuspecting. These things need to be approached gradually. So, we have twilight as an introduction, stars as a comfort zone, and dreams before awakening. Smithereens. I was glass, but didn't know it then. I was smooth, and they seemed to respect that. Yet, there were those that tried to keep me on a shelf, where I was always bored. And so, I frequently jumped off into soft pillows, or recklessly took chances by falling into someone else's hands. I never realized I was transparent. Perhaps I thought I was middle class, like my mother used to collect and display in her bay window. A bud vase with an artificial stem to be replaced by the real thing on special occasions, and left on display until dead. I never realized I was fragile. Then, once, during a hurricane, a vicious wind carried me off to a far place and smashed me into that brick wall that they say runners hit, and I splintered and shattered forever. I was nothing but slivers to be swept up into a dustpan, and yet no one noticed. So, I got left beneath that wall, and now, to this day, I sparkle like diamonds, multiplied, showing all my facets, odd and sharp, and always looking up and into the sun. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, Maria Hornbacher.
Joan Didion wrote, "We tell ourselves stories in order to live." And we do. We always have. We need our stories and know our stories like we need and know our names. They are where we hang our hat, what we come home to. They are the signs we hold in the mugshot. They are our handwritten message on the bathroom wall. Testimony, proof. I was here. This is what happened. This much I know to be true. So we speak and we whisper and scribble the stories that say where we've been and where we're going, and the stories that tell us where we are, who we are, what we've done, what's been done to us, and why. I am a child on the playground plucking dandelions, chanting rhymes. I am the man shuffling by in torn sneakers, pushing a shopping cart full of cans. I am you, out there in the dark. We all have a story that keeps the cogs and wheels turning in our heads. A story that brings order to disorder and sense to senseless things. A story that answers every why with because. For years I told myself the story of madness, knew it by heart. I told it because it lent logic to chaos, gave free fall, a beginning, middle, and end. I told it as if it was my only hope, as if the story was the only one I knew, the only one I could claim as my own. Madness is a pretty good story, full of plot twists, absurd situations, grim humor, car chases, dangers without and within. It's Charlie Chaplin and Gone with the Wind and Top Gun and Titanic all at once. Big budget and flashy, expensive, enthralling, cathartic, and then when it's over, the story, you fall silent. You're still sitting on a collapsing couch, side by side with a stranger in your pajamas and pink hospital socks. You are still you. You still need a shower. You're still locked up, still leaning your head on the window and looking out at nothing. Winter, your life. And now, I'm sitting here at my window watching the world break into springtime, trying to find a story I used to know about being brave. Once upon a time, the story began. Once upon a time. What is the story you whisper to keep yourself sane? February 18, 1990, a flat white morning and cold. I stood in the parking lot of the red brick cracker box building at the corner of 18th and 2nd, looked at the soot-blackened snow in the park, the bums on the benches, the trash in the trees, the rusted-out swing set and slide. I remember going up the front steps, ringing the buzzer, being let in, the heavy steel door, and then the heavy glass door, and then a quick series of clanging gray metal doors, up some stairs, down a hall, and into a room with no door. "This is your room," they said. "This is your bed. You may put your things in the cubbies and drawers." I thought, I am in kindergarten. I am in hell. Next, there will be snack and nap. They will give me graham crackers and juice. The nice people looked at me nicely, spoke softly, gently, as if perhaps I were stoned or they were. And they said, "How do you feel?" And I said, "I feel fine." And they said, "Fine is not a feeling." Trying to be helpful, they handed me a piece of paper that said at the top, "Feelings." There was an overwhelming list of possible options. There were feelings covering both sides of the paper. There were feelings I had never heard of, let alone ever felt. I studied the feeling sheet for a long time, and finally I said, "I feel ambivalent." They sighed. I sighed. They glanced at their clipboard as if there was an explanation for me there, seeing as I had no explanation for myself. That was where I learned the story of madness. I was told I had gone mad, mad as a hatter, mad beyond all hope of rescue or repair, and sensible people had thrown up their hands, and the nice nurses in comfortable shoes gave me pills in flowered Dixie cups, and important-looking people in suits seemed to be in charge. There were charts and stickers and white erase boards and gold stars for being on good behavior. We drew with dull pencils and ate with dull forks, and periodically I sat in the bathroom sink and used dull scissors to saw off my hair. The charts on their clipboard back then would have said, patient, female, age 16. Axis 1, bipolar disorder, type 1, rapid cycle, severe, axis 2, anorexia nervosa, chemical dependency, nicotine dependence, insomnia, not otherwise specified, possible PTSD. The charts changed from time to time. They changed with the doctor's rotations, the passing of seasons, the fads and the meds, the whims of the powers that be. I had only a few things to my name: a bed, a drawer, and a cubby. A room with no door, a window that looked out on the crime-infested park where, nevertheless, spring came bursting out of the hard ground every year and went climbing crazily in green vines and roses up the brownstones and red cracker box lockup where I lived in Stevens Square. April 25, 2015. I've lived in Stevens Square off and on for 25 years now. Denny, down at the coffee shop across the back alley, has himself a new set of teeth and calls out to me each day as he approaches, "It's a beautiful day, isn't it?" regardless of the day, and I reply, "Amazing, totally gorgeous," and we converse about the beautiful rain or the glorious slush or the pleasantly nose-numbing cold. I know people get fussy around the word crazy, but Denny is, by his own definition, a little crazy, and so is his roommate Jeffrey, and half the time, so am I, and in the very early morning hours, we sit at outdoor tables and read the paper and discuss hallucinations over granola parfaits. I say, "Do the meds help?" And Jeffrey says, "Not really," and I say, "Well, that sucks," and he agrees, and the conversation proceeds to a chat about the latest in boys or shoes. That's what I mean. Denny shows off his gleaming new teeth and has been graced with a way of seeing that tells him it's gorgeous every day. That is brave. Jeff is sipping hot coffee, reading the paper, and having hallucinations, and that is brave. My whole neighborhood is crazy and brave. The gaggle of giggling teenage girls that will come bouncing down the walk soon is brave. They'll be let out of lockup for their supervised morning stroll, twice around the park and then to the coffee shop, and they'll flounce up to us very coolly and ask to bum cigarettes. And because we are bad, irresponsible people, we will give them cigarettes. Because we have all been locked up smokeless for long periods of time. And the need for cigarettes is mind-bending, and the excitement of a latte and a 3-block walk is dizzying, exquisite when you have nothing left. What is the story that they tell themselves about how they got there? How do they make sense of the locks on the doors? What runs through their heads after lights out as they lie there, dark, sleepless shadows on single beds in bare rooms? From across the park, I watch the lights in their windows flick out one by one. How will they unlearn the story of madness now that they have been where they've been? Will they memorize that story, sketch it on their bodies, etch it into their skins? Or will they summon up the insane, improbable, totally crazy bravery it will take to write new stories for themselves? They wake up in the morning, and that is brave. They take their 3-block walk together, and that is brave. Bum cigarettes, brave. File back into the red brick building on the corner as the doors click shut behind them, and then they begin their day, braving the sameness that blunts their lives. They will get older. I watch them get older with each turn they take around the park, and I want to know what story they'll tell themselves that will help them move on. I would tell them the stories I know if I could. I would locate madness so I could tell them where it is and how to avoid it, or if they are to fall into it again, how to travel the abandoned roads of it, how to navigate the dead salt seas and the deserts and serrated peaks of the mind. I would like to pin it on a map like we used to do when I was a kid. We'd put pins in the map to mark where we were going or where we'd been, and stretch a thin red thread from point to point. And if I could, I'd trace the twists and turns and switchbacks of the path, from sane to mad and back again if I could. I would say to them, tell me your story from the beginning. No, start over. Start where you want to start this time. Fill the page. Fill page after page, right up to the margins and over them. Write everything you can think of, everything you want to say. Every joy, every rage, every grief, every dream. Write a treatise, a tirade, polemics, poems, stories, songs, anything. Just begin. Once upon a time, Adrian Rich wrote, we will not learn to settle for less. We have dreamed of this all of our lives. I would ask them, what have you dreamed of all of your life? There. That is your story. That is the story you'll need to keep yourself sane. That is your compass, your map, the tale you can tell as you go. Thank you.
I grew up in an upper-middle-class suburb of Boston on a horseshoe-shaped street lined with trees and Victorian houses. The houses were filled with families with 2 professional parents and 2 children of varying ages. It was the carefree 70s. We ran through the backyards of each other's homes, peed in each other's bathrooms, and played at whichever house seemed the most fun and supervision-free on any given rainy day. Seamus and Musa McCabe had a converted basement with shag carpeting, a bar with red pleather stools, and their father's collection of knives and swords covering one giant wall. The boys of Rockledge Road adored playing with his off-limits collection, and on one particular soggy afternoon, we ended up hanging out there. The boys were sword fighting, their arms straining to keep grasp on the big iron parcels. Seamus, the oldest, claimed he had a magic trick to perform, like Houdini, but he needed an assistant to get into the trunk. The trunk was a bright red musty thing with goldish metal latches and locks. His curly hair fell in greasy ringlets. His grin promised delight. His slim body at 12 taking on a sleazy quality one attributes to a much older frat boy. To this day, it is unclear to me why I climbed into that trunk. Even more so, why I let the lid be closed. Immediately, there was no air. It was hot, darkness smushing against my nose, mildew crawling up my nostrils and staying. The boys laughed, throwing the knives at the trunk, silver heads embedded, peeking through at all angles. I pounded my knuckles red. I screamed, "You guys, let me out, I can't breathe!" No one heard or listened. I couldn't get air. I was choking. I would soon die. I saw blackness. The humid darkness was a dirty sponge wiping my nose of air. Scary, right? Being trapped in the dark with no way out. Get a little panicky. You feel it? That's what it feels like to be depressed. I live with depression, so I can tell you about it. Depression rolls in like a bilious yellow supercharged Dyson vacuum with suction so powerful that all the resources are stripped away. The body is drained of energy. The despairing mind becomes helpless, on fire, and singularly focused on the pain. Time stands still. All thoughts are grounded in the excruciating moment-to-moment existence. Skin feels raw, brushing callously all day against clothing and people and furniture. The magnetic pull to the bed is debilitating. The urge to crawl into a soft, dark tunnel of relief for an hour or days. Everything feels overstimulating. It's as if the whole world got doused in too bright neon technicolor and is cranked up to volume 10. The depressed mind is left wincing at too bright and too loud and too much. Skin itches and writhes. Pills work and then don't. Talking helps for a moment. Alone is best, but terrifying. The only respite from the world seems to not be part of it at all. And depression lies. It screams and kicks and pinches and slams you with wave after wave of its bullshit until it's all you can hear. I'm a failure. I'm a loser. No one could ever love me. I'm too big. I'm too sensitive. All I do is let people down. I'm lazy. I'm bad. I believed the lies. I believed there was no way out. And the more I listened to depression, the less I could hear anything else. I cut myself to quiet my brain, and when that stopped working, I burned myself. I was just so tired of fighting. I was tired of prescribed hope pills with their side effects, tired of the quicksand exhaustion sucking me in, tired of cutting myself and burning myself and banging my head and lying and disappointing everyone. I was tired of smiling while my brain tried to kill me. I just kept sliding. I couldn't get my footing. It felt like my skin was unzipped and turned inside out with all my nerve endings exposed. Everything hurt. I spent a summer in the cold, humming, recycled air of the hospital. Hospital time was kept by med lines and meal times and smoke breaks and groups. The bright light on the unit reflected a chilly blue hue on everything. My shrink was the doctor of hope and talk, with Birkenstocks and glasses and goodwill to pour like Tang. I didn't trust her at first. Her sweet orange granule words lay undissolved in my throat. In that institutional summer, I began to shout back at the darkness of my brain, louder and more clearly each day. I am not alone. I am not too big. It is not too late for me. The more I talked back, the quieter depression got, backing down like a bully on the playground who's been caught. I began to anchor in a new familiar, hearing whispers of hope in my mama's voice, in a visit with my dog and the smell of his paws, in a pair of tie-dyed socks, in the shared pain of strangers. I learned that feelings aren't forever, that the truth isn't measured in decibels, that I am not alone. The dark filter of depression faded, burning off like the fog on a summer day. I bet you're wondering how I got out of that trunk, right? I'm standing here, so I must have gotten out, right? Okay, I'll tell you. It was black, and then it wasn't. Suddenly, the game was just over. Its fun as short-lived as the attention span of the young boys. The trunk lid was flung open as abruptly as it had slammed shut. There was light. To be in love with air at 9 is shocking. Instantly, the clean, crisp suitor of breath swept me off my feet. I ran home, leaving trunk and boys and basement behind. Once in the air, and the cool, and the light, it wasn't so bad. When you're no longer smothering, the memory of being smothered can play tricks. My mind does the same thing in depression's wake. I still live with depression. Some days it's tougher than others. Some days getting out of bed and brushing my teeth is a win. What I know now, though, is that it's not forever. If I stick it out, I will make it through. And I'm much more than my depression. It's a part of me, but I am so, so much more. And some pieces I like more than others, but they are all me. Needy and enough. Lonely and not alone. Struggling and okay. Scars and dimples. Grateful and impatient. Hopeful and uncertain. Terrified and brave. And when I can't remember any of this, on the days when the darkness clogs my pores and screams in my ears, I borrow hope until I feel it again. I breathe in the hope, inhaling it deeply into my belly, tethered to the truth of air. Thank you.
I am trapped in my room as it fills with water. The window and the door are sealed. The water level slowly approaching the ceiling, and I struggle below the surface. Bracing my feet on the wall, I pull on the doorknob with no effect. The hand crank on my window won't turn, so I beat on the glass with my hands, my shoes, the marble base of a swimming trophy. But the window is thick and unyielding, like the glass in an aquarium. I try to claw through the wall. My bleeding fingertips leave behind swirly trails of red in the water as I surface to press my face against the ceiling and suck in the last breaths of air. When I wake, I am panicked, unable to breathe, and my body finally returns to itself, and my lungs expand with a sharp, greedy gulp of air. On other nights, I, and often my mother and brother, are being chased, our pursuers close behind. The most disturbing part of these dreams is that when we are inevitably cornered, I become rooted, unable to move. I open my mouth to scream for help, but can never make a sound. Again, I awake, feeling that my entire body is paralyzed under the suffocating weight of an invisible and unassailable force. But I knew that lots of children had nightmares, and if I ever sought comfort from my parents, I was told, "It's only a bad dream." So I never thought to mention that mine were frequent and recurring. My days seemed brighter than my nights. I recognized that I was blessed by relative affluence, a loving family, a sharp mind, and a healthy body. If life still felt hard, if my stomach was a series of knots through which I attempted to pass food, if I felt lucky to make it to the end of every day without grave injury, I chalked it up to being human in a world filled with poverty and injustice. I didn't talk to anyone about these feelings, but I didn't feel I had to. I knew I couldn't be the only one who felt this way. In middle school, I wrote a poem. Some people spend their whole lives like a child on a sleepover, just waiting for it to end so they can finally go home. As a young adult, I never understood why many people bemoaned the aging process, while I gratefully watched the years accumulate like the completed pages of a term paper, each one bringing me closer to my goal. In my late 20s, I mused with a friend about whether or not I might be depressed. After all, my father had taken his life when I was 21. However, I was not like him. I did not make drunken calls in the night about how terrible life was, or believe my life to be an unending series of mistakes. My friend and I confirmed for each other that the degree to which we felt life was hard was appropriate to the realities of the world. So I ran marathons, I sang, I meditated, I swam in oceans, I studied Tai Chi, I prayed. Anything to find some relief from the fear and sense of inadequacy that gripped my heart. By the time I was 35, I had lived and worked on 3 continents, I had 2 graduate degrees, I was married and newly pregnant. But I still did not know that some women took showers or walked out the front door without being afraid. And then 2 weeks before the end of the first trimester of my first pregnancy, my doctor told me there was no longer a heartbeat. I was admitted to the hospital to end the pregnancy. It was sad and scary, but I held on to my anxiety and my despair and did what I had to do. I shed a few tears, signed forms, surrendered my clothes, held the hand of the nurse, took deep breaths, and counted backwards as I was put under twilight anesthesia. It was the last time that I would know how to hold myself together, and even who I really was for quite some time. As I woke in the recovery room, I had that familiar sensation of being immobilized, but it lasted long after I was fully awake. Perhaps set off by the anesthesia, or the sudden loss of pregnancy hormones, I came out of surgery feeling the full weight of what I had denied and ignored all of my life. It was not a simple sadness, or even an emotion of any kind. It was a physical pain that took my breath away. It coiled around my heart and attempted to wring out of it the will to continue beating. If I could have pulled my heart out of my chest, I would have. As I sobbed, I knew too that I had lost more than a pregnancy, and that there was no child or children who could return it. No longer content to check the days off my calendar, I now wanted for there to be no more days to count. I wished for this fervently, from the moment I woke until the moment I fell asleep, for the better part of a decade. Finally, though, for the first time in over 30 years of suffering, there was no denying that I was not okay, and that I probably never had been. My overdeveloped skills at hiding my depression made it difficult at first for me to get treatment. But when I did, I was stunned to discover that I, like most human beings, was able to be aware of the conditions and the perils of the world and not allow it to suffocate me. I learned that most people showered, opened the front door, entered rooms, went on trips without a breathtakingly painful sense of foreboding. They slept without screaming out. They knew joy without waiting for its inevitable end. So this is for every person I have told or will tell that their pervasive sense of despair is not inevitable and that they deserve relief. This is for the cardiologist at Mount Sinai Hospital who told me that my depression was not a medical condition and that I didn't really need my antidepressants. This is for the people, especially the children, waking up disappointed that they are still alive. I was right when I confidently wrote, some people spend their whole lives like a child on a sleepover, just waiting for it to end. But what I didn't know was that I and they did not have to feel that way. The miracle of being human is not the will to continue despite such suffering, but it is that we have the capacity to walk in this world and to know joys without fear, to feel that in our living, we are already home. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, Lisa Senna.
"17 magazine quiz, question number 1. You know that your friend's crush isn't interested in her, but she flirts like a maniac when she's around him. When she says she's planning on asking the guy out, you A, truthfully explain to her that you know her crush isn't interested in her. B, hint to her, not to get her hopes up because things don't always work out in life. C, decide not to hurt her feelings and say nothing. C, tell her she's a fool. As I sat in the dentist's office waiting room, pathetically losing myself in 17 magazines' What Kind of Friend Are You quiz, I contemplated the question for a moment. Granted, I was at least 30 years older than the magazine's key demographic, but it was the only magazine on the table. From my perspective, the answer was either black or white. There's always a choice to be made. Either say absolutely nothing or tell the absolute truth. So question 1 was easy. If it were me, I would tell my friend the absolute truth. I would tell her point blank that her crush was not interested in her. I'd tell her the absolute truth with no fear of consequence, because that is what good, open, honest friends are supposed to do. Well, 17 magazine did not appreciate my honesty. They labeled me a fair-weather, judgmental friend. I would soon come to realize that friendships and relationships aren't black and white. They're a very complicated gray. And you don't always make choices that you think you would make. I also learned that 17 magazine is no expert on friendship. So I'll no longer rely on a teen magazine for life advice. Let me tell you why. It all began when Jen and I met at work and something instantly clicked. We laughed at the same jokes and despised the same coworkers. We were stuck in suburban employment hell and it was a match made in heaven. We confided in each other and became inseparable. Our friendship continued to grow despite the fact that I left the firm and she stayed on. We continued to meet for lunch at a pub we called Our Place. Our lunches gradually progressed from sandwich and salads to wine and salad, to just salad for me and just wine for her. When I'd walk in, she was usually already finishing a glass and reordering. Granted, I don't remember noticing any of this at the time, but somehow I think I must have. Somehow, I know I must have. Sometimes she'd say she wasn't hungry and was drinking her lunch. I thought that line was hysterical and marveled how she could return to work and function after a couple of glasses of wine. We'd spend our lunches gossiping, telling stories about old co-workers, and I remember that feeling you get from just hanging out and laughing with a really good friend. I missed her. I didn't feel that same connection with anyone at my new office. I never wanted the lunches at our place to end. I remember the day that I first began to notice that something was different. It had been a while since I'd seen her. There was no other way to describe it, but she looked comfortable, but not in a good way. She looked as though she'd been there for a while. Her face was puffy. She was noticeably slurring her words. For the first time ever, our conversation seemed forced. She began name-dropping new friends she was hanging out with, and I knew none of them. I felt this longing need to hang on to the friendship exactly like it was before. I was worried about her. I was worried about us. Nothing had really changed, but everything had. There was a choice I had to make that day. Say absolutely nothing to her, or tell the absolute truth. I said absolutely nothing. Not long after that, I ran into a mutual friend who had seen Jen sitting alone having a drink at our place the week before. Jen had told her she was waiting for me and I was late. It wasn't true. But without skipping a beat, I did what BFFs of blossoming alcoholics do. I lied for her. It was the first of many lies I told. That night, I was sure I was going to call her and confront her. There was a choice I had to make that night. Say absolutely nothing, or tell the absolute truth. I said absolutely nothing. These episodes continued for much longer than I'd like to admit, and still I hung on. And each time, like clockwork, I made the choice. I said absolutely nothing. My breaking point came one night when her worried husband called me to check on her. She hadn't been there, but I said she just left. I was now her alibi, and it was quite a responsibility. Like the perfect friend I thought I was, I picked her up with a coffee in hand and drove her home as she blathered on that the reason she was tipsy was because she didn't eat dinner and it went right to her head. I know what you're thinking. I was now officially her accomplice. I was Thelma to her Louise. I felt sick to my stomach that I was caught up in her downward spiral and hadn't done anything to help her. Still, as I drove her home, there was a choice I had to make. Say absolutely nothing or tell her the absolute truth. I said absolutely nothing. I spent the next sleepless night anxiously tossing and turning as I slowly but surely came to the realization that I had let my selfish fear of losing her take over. So the next day, now perfectly calm and resigned to say what I had come there to say, I walked into our place, and I finally told my friend the absolute truth. Even though I practiced it beforehand, what I said was pretty cliche. You need help. I've had to lie for you. You shouldn't be drinking like this. You've changed. I don't even know your friends anymore. I don't know you. And finally, I'm telling you the truth because I'm your best friend. If I don't tell you, no one will. Well, I'll never forget her reaction. I saw an expression on her face that I hadn't seen before. If it was sadness or guilt or even remorse, I would have recognized it. It wasn't. It still sends shivers down my spine. With gratitude, she reached over, hugged me, held me close, and told me I was the best friend she could possibly ever have, thanking me for being honest with her and trying to help her when no one else had come through. I'm absolutely lying. She actually said, F you. Not a sweet, short, toned-down, PG-rated F you like I'm telling you, but rather a long, drawn-out, multi-syllable major F you. Then she put money down on the bar and she stumbled out of my life. To this day, she's never answered a text or phone call from me again. The upside is that in her hasty exit from my life, she forgot to unfriend me. So I sometimes still get to stalk her on Facebook. It looks like her marriage broke up. She isn't working at the same place we used to work, and I don't recognize a soul in any of her pictures. I don't recognize her. She must have a long story to tell, whoever she's telling it to. but she's no longer telling me. I want you to know that I miss her terribly, but I regret nothing. I don't agree with 17 Magazine. My telling her does not make me a fair-weather, judgmental friend. In the end, there was a choice I had to make. Say absolutely nothing, or tell the absolute truth. I finally made the right choice. I told the absolute truth. I had to be brave enough to be the friend I needed to be, and she had to ultimately be braver. I still have faith one day she will be. 17 Magazine quiz, question number 2. In your opinion, good friends, A, are true treasures, B, come and go, C, are hard to find, D, are hard to keep. My answer, all of the above. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, Susan Black Allen.
I have a history of depression, but this piece is not so much about me as it is about someone I care about. It's called Your Story. You have 50 cents in your bank account and visit food pantries, while I sip a latte at Starbucks and glance at my gold watch, wondering when Merry Maids will be done. But every week for 50 minutes, we are together. My office, your stories, stripped raw of circumstance, of formalities. You tell me about your alcoholic parents and money begged from strangers when you were 10 that ended up buying booze and not food. You tell me about the uncle who molested you and your cousins. Your parents buying their parents' secrecy. How you cried when they moved out. You tell me about sniffing glue and how if the lights weren't on after school, it meant your mother had passed out. At 65, you are still afraid of the dark. You tell me about no heat, no electricity, how you saved your money to replace the record your father smashed in a rage, hoping that your mother would listen to their favorite song again. You tell me about selling drugs and how you tried not to sell them to other kids, but if you didn't, they'd just buy them from someone else. You tell me about wanting to become an architect, how you were good at math, how a friend leaves you in the street after overdosing. You overhear a doctor say, "This one here, he's gone." You tell me about the teachers, the probation officers, the social workers, the detox counselors, all of whom tried to save you, when ultimately what saves you is a chance meeting with a man with blue eyes in a bar. It is for blue eyes that you get and stay clean for 35 years. He holds you in the dark, and you hold him back. You cook together, you have cats. Together you struggle, but your math pays the bills. Then blue eyes get sick, a heart big enough to hold the world. Your world, but not strong enough to never break. And now you are in my office, thick with grief. You have relapsed. You tell me you are not ready to die, but you have just hit a parked car while high. You are desperate and need my help. I pray to blue eyes that my green eyes are enough. For this beautiful, broken man, I hope that I am enough. Thank you. And now the amazing Michael Mack.
When I was 5 years old, my mom was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and she lived with and struggled with it all her life. But in the last year of her life, when she was 73, she gave me a new way to think about it. Not as a life defined by an illness, but as a life's work to be lived with dignity and nobility. This poem is called By Heart. In the last year of her life, I learned of my aged mother, a fact I never knew, a talent of hers, not secret so much as unrevealed, a scrap perhaps retained from her grade school, and shared with me one evening, like with the offhand grace of a tossed cigarette. She recited the Gettysburg Address by heart. Now this for some might not amaze, but for me, who as a child saw my mother's mind stormed by the devil-engine psychosis, I who witnessed her ricochet in and out of mental hospitals, electroshock, a galaxy of medications that left her ragged and mute, I who heard her mouth by rote only Sinatra lyrics and prayers, I sat dumbstruck as this tiny woman's carbonated smoker's voice shaped Lincoln's most famous speech. She sat bent in a deck chair on the front porch of her group home and recited suddenly, no preamble, no pause, as if she had practiced all her life. Perhaps she had, born 40 miles from Gettysburg in Columbia, Pennsylvania, not 77 years ago, but at 73, close enough for me to imagine her life as a kind of great battlefield. Schizophrenia, a great civil war, reminding me that the proposition that all men are created equal has not often included the citizens of mental illness. Her delivery, incantatory, like a mantra muttered to herself through every decade prior, in state hospital wards, jail cells, courthouses, and halfway houses, or shouted at the White House when homeless on the streets of D.C. At the words, "From these on or dead, we take increased devotion," I imagine the tens of thousands of mental patients before her who died, locked up, forgotten, nameless, and these words her call to the unfinished work of finding in their memory a purpose, that these dead shall not have died in vain. She closed her textbook road trip of the Gettysburg Address with a drag on her cigarette. My mother, in that last year, became a celebrity in her group home. Asked to recite at the dinner table or for guests at parties, she would shyly comply, eyes cast down to a faraway point on the floor, enraptured with the rasp of a dedicated smoker, her monotone relentless, but in its strict march to the end, more true, giving the last full measure of devotion in this portrait of her life's work, and finding, I prayed, in the spill of applause, a new birth of freedom. If the world will little note nor long remember this poem I share here, let's remember now my mother, on a porch one summer evening, the stem of a Pall Mall cigarette trembling in her fingers, as she recites for us, the living. the Gettysburg Address by heart. Fourscore and 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men living and dead who struggled here have consecrated it far beyond our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living rather, to be here dedicated to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, and this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for all the people, shall not perish from the earth. Amen. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back the incomparable a cappella magic of Boston Alley.
Just as long director of This Is My Brave. To send light into the darkness of men's hearts. Such is the duty of the artist. Those are the words of the 19th century German composer, Robert Schumann, who himself suffered from a long struggle with mental illness. There is no doubt that the light of art can facilitate social change. We believe that the symphony of stories heard here today has the power to heal both those who tell them and those who hear them. I'd like to take a brief moment to ask you, our audience, to stand up if you or someone you know has a mental illness. Before you sit down, look around. Mental illness touches everyone. Why is there a stigma at all? You can be seated. It's time to throw off the shroud of shame. In fact, it's long overdue. We belong to each other, and so do our stories. If you haven't already done so, we'd ask that you please leave a brave note on the board in the foyer to share how you have been inspired to be part of the changing dialogue surrounding mental illness. I know that this courageous and talented cast has moved all of us this afternoon. When Logan and I began work on this show, one hot summer day last year, we could not have possibly foreseen the magical generosity of spirit that would greet us at every turn on our journey. It became immediately clear that people recognized it was time to put a spotlight on mental illness, and that they, like us, wanted to be part of something bigger than themselves, a project with the power to change lives. Without them, this production would have been simply impossible. A special thank you to our beautiful cast for trudging through Boston's snowbanks. This cast trudged through the historic Boston snowbanks one cold February day to share their stories with two strangers from upstate New York. You are truly so brave. To the authors Amy Ferris and Mari Hornbacher for signing on early and enthusiastically when we invited them to be part of this day. To Valerie Van Gelder for sharing her Hollywood marketing and promotion talents with us at This Is My Brave. You truly brought us to a new level. Again, to Val Van Gelder and her co-conspirator Jennifer Eve of Sugar and Sky Edible Art Studio and their merry band of volunteer professional bakers for their talents, time, and the proceeds of today's gorgeous depressed cake shop in our lobby. To our family and friends, so many of whom are here today from very far away, as well as so many who could not be here but are here with us in spirit. And finally, in the back, to Jennifer Marshall and Anne Marie Ames, will you please stand? Directors of This Is My Brave, Inc., here today from Virginia. We thank you for your extraordinary vision and passion to create this movement of love and advocacy. So that's it. We'd be happy to greet you in the foyer where you may greet our lovely cast and eat more delicious cake. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you for being here today with us. One more time, the cast of This Is My Brave.